I'm going to start by actually inviting the audience to throw out, what kind of pushed you to attend today. Are there any particular questions on your mind related to the topic that you want to be sure we address? All at once.
I think for me, one of the things is you get test banks from the textbook publishers, but if you Google those questions, almost every one of them is out there somewhere. So how best to, especially online, in the classroom it's a little different because you can moderate that, but more so for online, how to design a good assessment that maybe doesn't utilize the test bank, or can utilize the test bank but in maybe a different way.
Great, thank you.
Dan, were you hoping to hear from everybody who's here and get their questions and then have us respond? Or
whatever they like. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot necessarily, but if anyone else would like to throw out an idea at this point, there are certainly a lot of angles we can address, but we want to be sure that your specific questions get addressed as well.
Hi.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Megan.
I was just going to introduce myself. I'm actually from UICA, and so I was just interested in this topic. I do not do any e-learning, but I was just kind of intrigued to see how you would present this topic. So I'm here as mostly an observer.
Thank you. Well, we're glad you're here in any case. It's you might find that one day it will be useful.
Okay, so I am in the Department of English, Literature, and World Languages, and I teach Spanish. So we use a website, and I am aware that, as Leslie said, they can complete assignments and then find the answers somewhere in the net. And that is okay with me because that is a very low percentage of the class. See, we grade a lot of things in a language classroom. But I have been told that one of my classes, someone put all of them together in a chat. I guess they are using their phones or the computer, I don't know. But they have been helping each other in the test as well. It's only one of the classes. So I've been playing. I have a quiz coming up, and of course the final. And I had to use Canvas. So I want to find a solution. I've been playing. I started using it, try to play with the classic quizzes in Canvas and group questions. And so I'm trying to play, and everything that I have been doing in the last week has been just Googling and trying to prevent that they are helping each other as they want to say. And also, even though I don't want to make a big fuss in the classroom, I still would like to talk to them about that, because a big group came from the previous level. Now they are on the second level. Then they're going to take another class and they're going to continue with this behavior, which I think I am not going to fight with them. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but to have an idea how to address this, because this is the first time that I see. And the sad thing is that it was reported by another student and she doesn't feel comfortable with this going on, because she doesn't feel like it's fair, like she's studying hard for the class, she's a very good student, and then she sees what is going on with the other students, so she doesn't feel comfortable, and she approached me. And I actually respect her a lot for that. So that's why I am here. And yesterday I just looked at the university-wide notices, and I saw this, and then I said, oh God, I need to go there. So that's why I'm here in my office, because when I am at home, I don't want to be in Zoom. But anyways, thank you for doing this, and I hope to learn a lot.
Thank you so much. And Anne, I think you may have missed the what's going on right now, but if there's any questions that you want to be sure that we address today, we're just inviting those at this time so we can be sure to touch on it as we move through the day.
I had one more thing to add.
Please.
I have heard that students have found ways to get around lockdown browser as well. And I'd be curious what we could do to circumvent that as well.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, lots of questions around technology. Important questions around how to take up the topic with students, I think. And I know our eminent panelists are into the research around these issues a bit. So as we dive in, we'll keep these questions in mind. And I want to ask them to start by maybe addressing, how do these issues intersect with your work kind of more day to day? What are the things that issues that might cause these issues in the first place, and how do we go about addressing them?
So happy to maybe get us rolling a little bit.
I was just going to ask you, Nick, why don't you get us started?
So Nick Campau, I'm Associate Dean of Student Life and Director of Student Conduct. So Leslie and Lucero, when it comes to test design, I'm no help on that. So I've taught FSUS, and that's been as far as I've gotten. But when it comes to the lockdown browser and talking with the students or talking with your class, I think I can offer my thoughts. So first, this is not a Ferris issue. In February, we have our National Student Conduct Association conference, and a third of the conference was COVID. The other third another third was academic misconduct in COVID. Because when there's not a proctor around, when the cat's away, the mice will play kind of notion comes out. So that's unfortunate. So I don't know if it's always helpful, but at least as some comfort, we're not alone. Yeah, right, correct. Everywhere folks are struggling with this. When it comes to some of the technology, I don't know of any, and even talking with colleagues, any great browser or software that when someone's in the privacy of their own home, there's not some workaround some way. So yes, you could have lockdown browser on, but your roommate's sitting on the other side of the camera, and you got your mask on for safety. And so you're not catching the mouth moving as you're asking the person to Google you questions. I mean, you could, Amazon Echo, you could just talk to it and it will find stuff for you. So that is a challenge. And as I was preparing for this and trying to think about what I can offer, knowing we have finals coming up, I think Lucero gets to more of your question of talking with our class. So it is an inherent expectation in any classroom in Western society that you don't cheat and you don't plagiarize. We have 5 other academic misconduct policies besides those, 7 in total, but students know those 2, and those are foundational, but they forget. And we justify things and we rationalize things in our minds. So I don't think we can talk enough about your expectations. I know you put it in the syllabus. You probably cover it the first day, but I think it's worth bringing up again because all of our students do have a pretty strong moral compass. I mean, we talk about like wholesome, fair students, they're like Midwestern nice by and large. And I think when we can remind them of our expectations as a learner, this is what they are. And here's how it can haunt you in the future. So you're in the second level Spanish class now, you're going to have to start talking a little to another person in the third level, and you can't Google your way out of that in class. I think helps bring a little bit of it to life a little bit more. And again, it's not a complete preventative measure, but when I think about academic misconduct, it's a moral breakdown. There's some sort of barrier that inhibits a student to want to get the grade they want. So they bend their morals. They know you should not cheat, you should not plagiarize to get around those barriers. And so having that conversation, bringing it real and talking about how it can impact them in the future, I think is appropriate. And I would do it at every, or with regularity. And you shouldn't have to, you should know it by now, but we've had to remove graduate students, doctoral students for academic misconduct levels. So it happens at every level, unfortunately. And Anne or Julie, I'll let you guys kind of take a stab as well.
I like, Nick, that you talked about, sharing our expectations, because I think for me, 100% agreed with that, but I kind of take it in a slightly different tack. I mean, I think there's that time spent, making sure that they know what we expect and that these things are wrong. But like you said, they really know that. I look at kind of a different model that I learned, way back when I was teaching 4th grade, and that is time in is more important than time out, kind of as a thinking mechanism where I want to spend more time talking about my expectations and talking with them about the relevance of what it is that they're learning and making sure that it's designed so that it doesn't even set them up as much. It's kind of like, if the plate full of cookies is right there on your kitchen table, it's so hard to walk by that without grabbing those, pass one of those cinnamon rolls, by the way. But if you have them, removed and making it a little difficult, that's something that's helpful. So like Leslie mentioned, is there a way to use these test banks differently? And one of the ways that I used to use that type of test bank is knowing that students can go on Quizlet and go on these. So when you're asked, a lot of those kinds of questions, and especially if you have a lot of students, for efficiency's sake, you do want to use some of these things because, just the time efficiency of it. But I would have them, they were allowed, they worked in groups. So bottom line, they were working in groups, and go ahead, use whatever resource you can use to answer the questions. But what I was grading and what they were responding in a slightly longer answer was, how did their group come to consensus around some of the more difficult ones? Did they find discrepancies? Because there are even, with some like the Quizlet and whatever, where you get 2 different answers, which one do you go with? And having them share about their learning to learn process more so than the information of the questions. Because then I was looking at if they were working in a group and trying to get 100%, and it was pretty, a lot of times I would set it so it's kind of like all or nothing. Because if you're going to look it up, then you need to look it up and get the right answer. And then essentially you're getting study time. But then looking at having them, submit the, either the muddiest point or those kinds of discussions on the learning to learn, I have found helpful. So then it's less for me to grade in terms of worrying about the whole cheating thing. And it allows them to use those essentially as study references. And with Spanish and with a lot of other ones, I highly encourage, and I'm going to stop so other people can share, but using some of the more advanced tools in there, because, especially for teaching language, but letting them have their voice. They can do the video recordings, whether it's a video recording or even just an audio recording, and having more emphasis during the session so that I am able to see them speaking about their ideas. And, I have, like right now, if we took a picture, I've got everybody's name, and I could have my checklist to see who actually spoke and answered questions, just like I would if I was in face-to-face. So I've got that as my reference where they're having to participate actively.
And that is something that our website has and that I have created as well. But my concern is that kind of help that they are giving each other, see? And that maybe a screenshot that they have sharing with each other. That is my concern, because yeah, as I said before, we have different ways to evaluate in the language classroom. It's not only one, it's to listen and speaking, reading and writing. But I wanted to learn a little bit more of the Canvas and how to regroup because at the end I had to give them a written test. And of course I create text where they have to give long answers versus an ABCD. Sometimes it's ABCD, but most of the time it's the essay question type. So yeah, but I don't know. Maybe I didn't say it right, but anyways, it's because also I want to know how to address this, because I have never seen it this way. Of course, I have always seen it but anyways, but it seems to be that it's really, really uncomfortable for some students, the way that is happening. See?
Lucero, and this maybe relates, Leslie, to your question as well. I'm just realizing that I think we lost Megan. Are you familiar with mechanisms in Canvas that can be used to sort of randomize questions or shuffle the order in which questions appear? I'm seeing maybe heads nodding yes. Okay.
Yes, I've been learning, because there are also two types of quizzes, and the way I understand them, they are very different. I don't know, because when you open a quiz, it gives you the option, the new quizzes and the classical with quizzes. And the way I see the new quizzes and the way that I have been understanding that is, I create a question on top, right below another one. I don't know how to regroup them, but the classic quizzes give me the option to play with groups. I haven't understood very well how to do that in the new quizzes. See? So that's why I wanted to see if there is a way to actually do it the easy way. I've been looking online, of course, and I've been trying to use that.
Dan and Tracy would probably speak to some of the technical specs of that certainly better than I could, but I just wanted to make sure that at least as a starting point, you knew that there's options for that type of thing in Canvas. Couple other things that are on my mind when I think about this, and Dan had raised the question about, what are some reasons why students might feel compelled or feel tempted to engage in dishonest behavior. And one of the things that we know is that students are more likely sometimes, or they may be more likely, right? Not every student on every time, to cheat when they feel or when they know that it's a really high stakes exam, when it's kind of a one-shot thing, or when they feel really anxious about it. And so a couple ways to deal with that are, when possible, make sure that students have lots and lots of opportunities to practice. There was one, I'm forgetting the location of where this happened, but where a group of professors was realizing that students were accessing a lot of the question banks, and they decided to basically just acknowledge that, kind of offer these questions to students as practice questions. And part of the reasoning was, if they are, and I believe this was in a face-to-face context, so it's a little bit different online, but part of the reasoning was, if students are given questions in advance and they're treating them as practice questions, right? That's retrieval practice, which is sort of one of the science of learning strategies that works for students. It's actually requiring them to study. So they sort of twisted the problem in a different way and said, if students are going to look for the questions, let's front load them with the questions as an opportunity to learn better, to practice more, which then also has the benefit of lowering some of the anxiety and the sense of high stakes for the exams. Another way to reduce some of the high stakes temptation could be a post hoc strategy, where students might know that they have an opportunity to resubmit answers that they get wrong for some fractional amount of points, or to even take a test first individually and then take it with a partner or with a group. And so knowing that they can learn from their mistakes pushes them more into a mastery learning viewpoint, and can then reduce sort of the impetus they might feel to engage in dishonest behaviors. One other thing that I'll mention, and then I would love to hear maybe what Anne is thinking as well. Tracy also talked about expectations, like the putting in versus the getting out. And while the research is mixed, Nick, maybe you can speak to this better than I can. There have been some studies that suggest that having students sign, co-create with you and then sign like an honor pledge can increase the likelihood of them maintaining academic integrity or maintaining honest behaviors. But I think getting their buy-in and creating that pledge is one piece of what makes those honor pledges impactful. So just a couple thoughts. I would like to pause. I'd love to hear, Nick, if you have more thoughts about that, or Anne, whatever you might be thinking.
Thanks, Julie. And thanks, Dan, for setting this up and inviting me. I have a little bit more to say on that, what Julie was just talking about, but I just will briefly talk about some of the talking points that Dan had asked about, how my work intersects with issues of academic integrity. There's two major ways. The first is that as a faculty member, for classes where students have to get a prerequisite grade to get into their programs. And so the class that I teach, medical microbiology or biology 108, students have to get a B- or better to get into nursing school. And they also have only one chance to retake one of 3 science classes. Anatomy and physiology, med micro, and their chemistry class. And so a lot of students might be on their last chance. And if they don't get that B-, then their hopes and dreams are dashed, even though they could apply somewhere else other than Ferris. So that is an example of the high stakes situation. Maybe not a single exam being high stakes, but the course itself is high stakes. The other way my work intersects with this is some of the work we've done in the faculty center and also in collaboration with eLearning, best practices for online exams. I've done a little bit of reading and on the research into best practices. So whatever would be most helpful to the participants here, I can share about. The main thing that I'm thinking of right now is just my own experience. I have sent students to Nicholas's office before. I've reported incidents, but if things like that happen, I think how I treat my students really matters, to not see it as like a, you're a terrible person and you're being reported, rawr, but just as a, some corrections need to be made. And I think one of the ways that I try to prevent the cheating in the high stakes environment is to express a consistent and constant belief that my students can get there despite a low first exam score. And that does sometimes happen on that first exam. When I taught in person and when I will be teaching in person again, I use 2 different versions of the exam, but they look almost identical. And so if students cheat, they'll get a really low score on that first exam. And it's also something that provides pretty significant evidence if all of their answers match the answer key for the other exam. But even if something like that happens, I don't accuse. I'm like, wow, low score. Let's talk about learning strategies. Let's talk about test anxiety. Let's talk about ways that we can improve. And I go through grade calculations with them. I point out how the second half of the semester is point heavy in non-exam assessments. And so we just go through and we calculate, well, this is really the average you need on the rest of your exams in order to get your goal grade. And most students leave feeling like, I think I can do that. I think I can do that. It's really there's this perception that if you get a low score, then you need to get all 100% from here on out just to pass the class. And sitting down and doing those calculations with them, and in combination with, kind of assessing and inventorying, if that's a word, their learning strategies and study skills really helps. And then I even mentioned, and even on the second exam, even a little bit of an improvement is a sign that you're going to make it. It's trying to just tend to the that anxiety and that high stakes. In an online environment, it's a little bit harder, because even though pre-pandemic, a lot of studies have shown that students are no more likely to cheat online than they are in person. In fact, in-person cheating is often higher. There's more of a group mentality of, if someone else is doing it, then it's no longer moral. A moral issue if I do it too, because everyone else is. And so most of our students do have those ethical standards, but when you're in a group of people and things start to go in one direction, it's hard not to follow that. When you're on your own, it's easier to make decisions based on your own ethical standards. But then COVID changed things, because as a professor, I didn't have time to rewrite all of my exams as online exams. I kind of used a lot of the same old ones, changed them slightly, mixed up the questions, mixed up the order of the answers, and just hoped for the best. And so I allowed students to use their notes, and if I just expecting that they might anyway, and I just had a lot of conversation and emails with students about my expectations, the things that I consider cheating, that I don't know if it's ethical that I kind of stretch the truth a little. I say that, there are ways of detecting cheating. I know that those things exist. I don't necessarily use them, but I know they exist. I just say that they exist to hopefully deter it. And in a couple of cases, I have caught students online who start and end the test at the exact same time, even though they have like a 3-day window to do it. In one case, they were related and living in the same home, and all of the answers were the same, the scores were the same. And I was like, oh, I don't like this, because no one wants to report things. And I didn't report this one. Pandemic times, I just didn't have the heart to do it. Instead, what I did is I emailed the students separately, and I just pointed out my observations, did not accuse them of anything, and just said, moving into the final, I just want to make sure you're aware of what my expectations are. And then I restated that and sent it to the whole class. As well, putting the expectations, not just in the syllabus, not just in an email, but in the instructions right at the beginning of an online exam. Like, here's what you're allowed to use, here's what you're not allowed to use, right at the onset of the exam. And similar to what Julie was saying, I got this advice from a friend who teaches in math, and she actually puts the first question is like a agree, disagree question, or type in their name to sign, where they actually have to read the instructions for what you can and cannot use, and then, say yes that you agree, and just includes that as the first exam question. So, we could probably keep trying to find more and more and more ways to sort of control the situation, but at the end of the day, it's almost like my efforts to try to control it and try to make sure there's zero cheating cause me more stress and anxiety than just, I don't want to say not worrying about it, but just taking some reasonable precautions, setting a class culture of me trusting my students and hopefully them trusting me. And when I act as if I do trust them, I don't know, maybe they're taking huge advantage of me. But when I act like I trust them, I feel like they are more likely to act in a trustworthy behavior. That was a lot. Thank you. And I don't remember if I answered any of Julie's questions or Lucero's or Leslie's. So I'm
In
open.
any case, it was great. And I think you spoke to many of the questions that have been raised so far. Lots of points made about expectations, classroom climate, and strategies you can take up with students surrounding their predilections, tendencies to behave one way or another. I wanted to get to, in addition, a couple of the questions spoke to different assignment types, and are certain assignments more susceptible to students cheating on those versus others, and what can you do if you're teaching in the choices you make for the assignments you include, and how you can go about maybe detecting dishonesty if it's happening, or mitigating that through those design choices. Is there anyone that wants to speak to that?
I would be happy to, unless Anne, did you have something on that you wanted to?
You go ahead first. That's fine. I'm going to think a little bit.
Okay. And by the way, I really liked how Anne was very clear about not accusing, because I think especially because of the pandemic, there are a lot of people who in some classes, actually, they are creating that back channel to survive in the classes, because not all professors are very present and they're confused about what to do. And it even bleeds over into classes where the professors are very much present. As far as designing assignments, some of the things that I have found that work really well to, to more authentic work are where I use portfolios and that type of project. And what I like to do is have them start the portfolio. Typically, I'll give them a template of, my basic expectations so they know what it's at. But they create a copy, and I've used it in many different forms. So anybody, we can always help you with that later. But they share the link back to me. So they're not always submitting, but yet I can go to that one link to check whether or not they've submitted the things. And when you do that, it actually shows you some of their revision history and things like that. So you can see the progression of their ideas. Now, going back to efficiency of grading a portfolio can take an intense amount of time if you're grading every single thing in it. So I combine that with another strategy where I have them reflect, and I don't give out these prompts until later on, and I do vary them, but they're reflecting back on their portfolio. And it's a variation of questions of, select your best piece from this category, or from your first post to your last post, how do you feel that you grew the most? And so then I'm grading more on their thinking, but I can check back to see, did their thinking evolve? Did the answers evolve? Does that make sense? So that's one of the ways that I found to make sure that, it's original work and not something that they're just, cutting and pasting and not making progress, or even just, working with their peers. I do a lot of work with that, and I found that, again, that's worked well over time. And then the other piece in written assignments is I will make sure that there's a component in their written work where it has to be connected, and I give them a time period to something that happens in a current event within, say, the past month. So again, as long as my question is high enough thinking, there's always something you can find that's happened in the news that will be able, but that keeps it in that current. So even if they take another, say their roommate had the class the semester before and they kind of already know what's expected, they still have to synthesize and take in how it's changed with a new reference. And that helps, at least, again, it allows them some safety if they are using something, but it still keeps it current and causes them to have to internalize that through that different type of thinking. So those are two types of assignments that I twist a little bit to hopefully create a productive, original work.
And did you want to take up the cause on this one here as well?
Thank you. No, does anybody else have anything they want to share first? I don't want to speak over. I can add ideas last. Okay. You'll have to forgive me, y'all. I had to let my dog outside, so that's why my camera is turned off. I'm gonna be a student here and ask you, can you please repeat the question that we're focusing on right now?
Yes. How can design choices in the assignments you're choosing to give to your students help to mitigate the chance for dishonesty?
Okay. I think I've spoken a little bit about that so far. Giving different exams. If it's online exams, I'll scramble the choices. I also like to give a lot of quizzes and assignments that are done as groups. So that way there's a clear standard for, there's a time for consulting with your peers. But these 4 things are going to be assessments of your individual learning. So it's important to not consult with any of your group members or peers. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank. I'm gonna pass. That's all I have to share right now. Thanks.
No worries, and thank you. Okay, any other things jumping to mind, or any other questions from the group that you'd want to add to the conversation at this point? We did get the question I was anticipating about technology, and specifically things like lockdown browser, unit check, things that are in use widely, not only at Ferris, but things designed to mitigate cheating, but maybe come with their own set of problems. What thoughts does the panel have on those kinds of things, and are the benefits worth it?
I feel like this is always a tough question. And I'm imagining my co-panelists feel similarly. So there can be benefits to remote proctoring of exams. But I, and others may disagree with me, and I realize that this is a controversial question. I tend to err on the side of the challenges right now may outweigh the benefits for many situations, not necessarily all of them. So for example, you have, there's some equity issues that are built in with things like remote browser, and there's some evidence that suggests students with darker skin tones are more likely to to flag the system than students with lighter skin tones in terms of eye movements and things like that when they're being tracked and monitored. That creates a big problem when we think about inclusive design and equity issues. So that's one significant concern. Then there's also issues with so many students working from home environments, and having to have a camera on could be really intrusive or invasive for them. And there's workarounds, as have already been documented, which alone can create, are you getting students that are just better at gaming the system? Is that really what you're starting to measure, or are you actually measuring content knowledge? So those are some of the significant drawbacks that I think about when I think about remote proctoring. There can be situations where they might be really valuable. So for students that need to, for example, take high stakes board certifying type of exams, and they may even one day take those in some sort of remote proctoring environment. So getting practice using a remote proctoring tool to take such exams could actually be valuable for those students. But again, the practice piece, right? Getting used to the stress, the added intensity that they may experience when they have a camera on, when they are being so closely tracked during the exam. That practice piece can be really important. And then also provides an opportunity to see, like, am I going to be inappropriately flagged for some behaviors for any number of reasons? So those are some of my thoughts. You know, when it's possible to kind of go back to what Tracy was saying, what Anne talked about a little bit earlier, to design more problem-based, or what often shows up in the literature as something called authentic assessments, which can mean any number of things, but often are things other than multiple choice exams. But when it's possible to use those, that can be a way to set aside the issues that can come up with proctoring. Does that answer the question a little bit, Dan? I'll stop here if it did.
No, I think it did, yeah. And I'm sure maybe some of the others want to chime in on this one as well. Or maybe not.
I don't really have, Anne here again. I guess I just would like to echo what Julie said. There are pros and there are cons. And certainly there will be students that can still cheat despite whatever it is that we do. You know, just knowing that the monitoring exists, does that help prevent things? You know, probably. Are there other things that can be done to help minimize and prevent? Most likely. So I liked what Julie said about, you know, they may have to take these types of exams in the future. This is good practice. That's a pro. Minimizing cheating, also a pro. But when equity comes into the equation, it's really hard for me to ignore that and any action that could potentially cause issues related to equity. Sometimes I have a hard time weighing the pros and the cons in those situations. And so I will tend to favor not using them. So that being said, maybe more people might cheat, but at least they may do so equitably. I don't know. I'm not meaning to make a joke out of it. It's just, I just really appreciate some of the facts that Julie shared and some of the hesitation that I have to use those systems. I have a lot of colleagues that disagree. So I think considering every exam or every class is a case-by-case scenario, trusting the judgment that you have at the time, and making sure other course elements might, you know, balance out the weight of one decision you might make with another assessment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever recommended the use of lockdown browser, and I doubt I ever will. Very much related to those things of equity. There are a lot of, even the economic equity, it runs into, students with disabilities, but also having to have a device that's capable of running it. Because in my experience, which at this point in time, I'm at 29 years, which is very frightening, but in very few instances, is using lockdown browser something that actually brings value to the student in their future life. There are reasons for proctored tests, and there are some high stakes tests, absolutely, that do need proctoring, but there are other options for a lot of that proctoring. And for those uses, I think where there are very specific uses towards outside accreditation tests at certain points, I think it is, absolutely, I've worked with nursing departments in the past, necessary to find ways to make sure that the test is proctored. For a lot of the uses of lockdown browser that we see, it's really just because the faculty member or adjunct who's teaching it, is not willing to trust the students or to trust the process, and, or lacks the time. I mean, there are valid reasons that there isn't time, perhaps, like Anne said, during the pandemic, she simply did not have time to recreate all these things. That's a very valid response. But I like the the way the state of California handled the pandemic was to say that it was actually discriminatory against all the people in their area of all the state of California higher ed system that are honest, that are ethical, that want to do the right thing. So it's actually discriminatory against all of them to force them to use procedures that are specific to trying to prevent cheating from other people. There are, you can work with local libraries. There are still issues with equity, but even during the pandemic, some of the local libraries, you could make appointments. Again, there are lots of other ways for those instances in which the high stakes test is something that is required by the outside accreditation related to the future career choice. But if it's not, then it should be taken off the table from the get-go, because like Julie brought up authentic assessment, it's not an authentic assessment already. So again, it's raised test anxiety. And right now we're looking at a mental health crisis in the college age students in particular. So to add unnecessary barriers to me is just fundamentally and ethically wrong. So again, you'll never hear me use that as a first choice. Again, I have worked with people in situations where they do need to proctor, and we have worked to find ways that are equitable for all of the students in the class, but it is something that I highly recommend just taking off the table for almost any situation wherever possible, because of the inequities, the anxiety, and the technical failure. And then the other reality that we know is students, as Nick brought up, they can still find, I think it was Nick, where again, they'll still find ways to cheat. The ones who really, really want to cheat, they will still find the ways. I've been, walking out of Home Depot one time, and the people at the door were talking about how many laptops they had to own in order to beat the system. When I was teaching pre-service teachers at Grand Valley University, one of the assignments I gave them was to design an uncheatable test. And they can't do it, because unless it's something that requires the faculty member to grade an authentic piece of work, involving handwriting, some type of, visual, there's really nothing that's not cheatable. So energy devoted to that is kind of a waste in a lot of ways. Again, not always. You can set them up with practice, but that browser, the lockdown browser, when you throw in those other alternative technologies, or even having to have I know people, they have their phone where they have to put themselves on the camera on the phone while they're on the laptop. I mean, when you live somewhere rural, or even if you have multiple families, the bandwidth that they're taking and the expense from that is just beyond belief to require that as a comparison basis. And it is a horrible invasion of privacy. And like Julie brought up, issues of diversity in terms of different perceptions of color and face and facial expressions. I've heard stories, with Asians students, because again, you tend to look down. Well, then they're hiding their eyes. So they must be cheating, right? Wrong. That's a cultural norm for them. So yeah, it's an interesting topic. I'll shut up now before the high horse just falls over on me.
Well, I'm glad everyone brought up the things that they did. And from a purely technical standpoint, these are the kinds of things that require 10 things to go right, and only one has to go wrong before it will deny you access to the quiz. So for that alone, might be a good reason to avoid using it, just because of the nature of, we don't know everybody's technical situation, the devices, their location, their network access, and things like that. So thanks everyone for the thoughts on that. And if you have more to say, please go ahead.
Yes, I don't want to take up time, but I thought about something that Leslie had asked about at the very beginning of the session, test bank questions. I teach a class where I have lots of test banks available. I never use them. What I do is I look at them sometimes for ideas. Sometimes they have really good images that go with their questions, and I'll take out the image and write my own question, or I'll think of a similar concept related to how the textbook asks it. But I write my own learning outcomes and study guides for each chapter and unit, and I write my test questions based on those, using the textbook test banks as resources. I don't think that's just because of the pandemic and online cheating and Googleable answers. I think that has always been my preference, but I think it helps with pandemic times.
Thank you. Well, we've hit on the major topics that we've wanted to cover. So at this point, we're doing fine on time, but I wanted to open it up again to our audience to see what other thoughts this has generated. Any other questions come to mind? Is there anything specific you've run into maybe in your discipline or in your department that we might be able to speak to further? Leslie, please go ahead.
I'm trying to think of other things that I've encountered. And nothing's coming to mind. But what I did do is I don't like lockdown browser either. I've had bad. I tried it once. It went horrible. Never again am I going to use it. But the one thing that I do with a couple of my classes is team tests, where they and I do this in the classroom too. I've always done it face to face, and I've been trying it with during the pandemic, and so far it's gone well. But the very first question reminds them of the academic integrity. They can't Google anything or use any outside resources, but they're free to use each other. And in the classroom, as I'm listening and walking around, it's amazing to hear the crosstalk and the relearning, I guess, the retrieval and rehashing of the material. It's heartwarming as the professor, because they start discussing it, and then once they get into a conundrum on, well, is it this or this? Well, then they start reaching back even further to try to figure it out. So I've been trying it with the where they can set up their own Zoom session, and just with their team, it's timed so that way they have the same amount of time as if they were in the exam period or during a class period, but they normally finish earlier. But I've had good results with that.
That sounds great, Leslie. Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to think about that.
Thank you, Leslie.